Hey folks, we're going to be doing a mixing video today because I got something in the mail a couple of days ago that I have been waiting for literally for months. So this is Vallejo's Pearl Medium. It's used to make the cloud mix, and I ordered it back in March. I've been waiting since March, so 3 months for this to come in the mail, and it finally came. And before I can use it, I have to mix it up. So I thought, why not do a mixing video in case anybody's curious? How do you mix your paints for clouds? This is how. So I do everything by weight. You can do it by volume. I'm not sure that there's that much of a difference, but what you're really looking for is a consistency. So we are going to mix it up and then we'll check the consistency. So the first thing I do is zero out my scale, make sure it's in grams, and my cup is down. We're going to be doing 1 part of the Vallejo Pearl Medium, 1 part of Artist Loft Soft Body White, and then 2 parts, I can't even fit it in here, of the Floetrol. So the Floetrol you can get from Home Depot or Menards or, Lowe's. Basically any hardware store would carry it. They usually carry it in the section with paint sprayers because it's used as a paint flow extender for, specifically for paint sprayers, but also just, general paint stuff. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so we're going to start out with our Vallejo. I haven't even opened the bottle yet. I'm so excited. All right, so we are going to squeeze out a bit. I think we're gonna start with, let's do 20. Okay, so that's 20 grams of Vallejo Pearl Medium. Next, we're going to add the same amount of the Artist Loft Soft Body White. Come on, there we go. Just get off there, you little bloop. Okay, now we are going to add twice that amount of Floetrol. So let's see, we had 20 each, so we're going to add 40 of the Floetrol. Okay, close enough. And that's it for the cloud medium. Now we just stir it up. Or the cloud mix. And it's good, I hear, to let this sit for a couple of days before using it because bubbles form while you're mixing, and anytime you get bubbles in your mix, any of the paints really, then the bubbles are going to pop up to the surface after you pour your paints out, and they leave very unattractive little holes. All right, so we are going to mixy, continue mixing until it all comes together in one gloopy hole. Scraping the edges, scraping the bottom, make sure we get everything. And then we will check the consistency in just a second. Ooh, sparkly. Okay, so we're going to twirl it, and we're essentially looking for a 2 to 3 second trace, which means that the line that it makes when I swirl it across should last 1, 2, and then sink. 1, 2, and sink. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So that's done. That is how you mix up cloud mix. All right, so that's gonna get a cap on it and go to sit for a couple of days. The next thing I'm going to mix is I am going to need a lot of black because I'm very sick of fighting with the edges. So I just wanna mix up a heap of black just to have it on hand. So I have it as a flow extender. So I basically wanna almost fill this cup. This is 12 ounces, 16 ounces. I'm not really sure. I should probably check, but whatever. We're gonna fill up this cup. All right, so for this one, because it's just like to go around the edges and to be a flow extender and kind of background, I'm going to use the Artist Loft Flow Acrylic in black. It's, it's just the one that I have on hand. I don't think it really matters what you use. I'm just trying to use something cheap because I'm going to use a lot of it. So this is what I have. So let's squirt out some, make sure we're zeroed. Okay, so we're going to squirt out a bunch of paint. Let's do 100 grams. And again, it's not really, ooh, sorry, that was kind of loud. It's not really about like the amounts. I measure because it's the easiest way for me to start. But the end result is based entirely on the consistency. And this black tends to be rather thin. So we're going to take it up to 300. So that's 1 part paint to 2 parts Floetrol is how I mix my my pouring medium. And it's a good place to start, but it's not where you finish. So like some of the paints are going to be thicker and some of the paints are going to be thinner. And, depending on whether you have thicker or thinner paints, you might have to add more Floetrol if it needs to be thinned out, or you might have to add more paint if it needs to be thickened up. So it all depends on the consistency of the paint. And this one is pretty thin. It's the Flow Acrylic. I don't even know if they make Flow Acrylic anymore, but it was a really, like, even softer than the soft body. It's even a little bit thinner than that. So this one we might have to add a bit more paint to thicken it up. I might even add a different black to thicken it up if it's looking really thin. But the only way to know is to check. So I'm gonna keep on stirring until all of those lines of Floetrol disappear and we just have black. Scrape some of the edges. Got some Floetrol sticking to the edges. And then mix, mix, mix. And again, I'm gonna let this sit for a couple of days because it needs to let the bubbles out. Now I say that, I'm gonna let it sit for a couple of days, and like, let's be honest, I'm probably going to paint with these today or tomorrow because I won't be able to wait. And then I will be very mad at myself because it'll have bubbles. So I only have myself to blame. But I have a color palette in mind that I wanna be working with next. And I wanna do like reds and golds and coppers and, kind of like a crimson, fiery kind of sunset cloud pour. Not necessarily sunset, but bright red, like golds, lots of colors. And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but I definitely want to mix up my paints. And oh, that's what I was going to say. I want to try a smaller piece before I do a 20 by 20, because when you commit to those 20 inchers, it's a lot of paint, and I'm not used to wasting a lot of paint. Like when I do blooms, the Shelly Art blooms are great because you use very little of paints and pigments. They last a really long time. I've had the same tubes of paints for months and months and haven't run out of any of them because you use so little in the blooms. But when you're doing these cloud pours, you use an absolute ton of color, which I'm not really used to. So I'm gonna do, I think, a 12 by 12 before I go up to the 20 incher, just to make sure everything's working right, especially because this is a new cloud pour mix and I haven't used, new cloud mix, and I haven't used it yet. Okay, so let's check this consistency. 1, 2, sync. It actually looks pretty good. So we're gonna leave that. Well, I'll check it again before I use it, obviously. And it might thicken up over the next day or so. Okay, so that's how I mix my tube paints. And I have a couple other ones here. Liquitex. I don't know how to pronounce this. I've heard people say alizarin, I've heard alizarin, but whatever. It's Crimson Hue Permanent, and it's a semi-opaque. So this is one of the other colors I'll be mixing up. I also have some piggies, and I'm going to show you how to mix up the pigments in just a second. I'm trying to decide if I really need all four because they're kind of a pain to mix when you're mixing them, but like the outcome is pretty spectacular, so it's kind of worth it. So one I was thinking about using is this little piggy, or like for the very, very center, I was thinking this gold. And then right after that, also in the center, but on top of the gold, I was thinking about using golden peach because it is beautiful. The other one, when I think about reds, I always pull out Grenache. It is beautiful. It's a really deep red and it has like copper tones to it also. So I was thinking about using that one. Because of the copper tones in that, I was thinking about using cinnamon. And I'm not really sure if I need to mix up all of my piggies or just a few of them, but I know I'm definitely going with these three, the golden peach and Grenache I am definitely using. The cinnamon, I'm not sure. I have Amsterdam copper, which I use as a cell activator in my blooms, and they're very, very similar in color, but it's like way easy to mix up the Amsterdam copper in the pouring medium. So I don't know, this one might not win out just for ease sake. And then the other tube paint I was thinking about adding just toward the bottom was I have this Artist Loft Old Gold. I bought it a long time ago. I don't really like it, but for the outside of a cloud pour, it's not going to show up a whole lot. And I thought that might be an easy way so that I'm not wasting any of my precious piggies, which I like a lot more. So I'll probably mix up some of that. So if you hang on for just a second, I'm going to go get all of my stuff together for mixing up the pigments and get my respirator on, and I will be back and show you how to mix those pigments. Okay, I'm back. Before I put my respirator on, I thought I would go through the things that I'm going to use because you're not going to be able to hear me very well when I'm using my respirator. So I mix my piggies on a sheet of plastic that was like left over from a box. I do that because it's easier to squish out the pigments and mix them up into a smooth form when they're not in a cup. When they're in a cup, it's really hard to squish down on the bottom or like against the sides and really get those chunks out, and it tends to mix up a little chunky. So what I'm gonna do first is dump some of my pigment out on the plastic. Then I'm gonna get it wet with Jo Sonja Gloss Varnish. That's what I use to disperse my pigment. Once it's wet, I can take my respirator off and talk with you again. But then after I get that all mixed up, I am going to mix in a gloop of my Liquitex Gloss Super Heavy Gel. I think I explained in a previous video, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the Super Heavy Gel. It's not necessary. It's probably easier to mix it into Gloss Heavy Gel or just Gloss Gel. But this one was on clearance at Michael's, and I'm a bargain hunter. What can I say? So that's why I ended up with that one. All right, so I'm going to get my respirator on, and then we will scoop out the piggy and I'll show you how to mix it up. Okay, my respirator is on. So I'm gonna start with this little piggy, Grenache. Tap the top. Carefully take it off. So you can kind of see well, maybe you can't, but there's little particles that are flying around. That's why we wear the respirator. So I'm going to take a big scoop of this. Oops. Making a mess already. Okay. That's probably good. Oh, poor piggy got spilled on my table. Okay. So we are going to take our Jo Sonja and spritz it down on the top with a bloop. And we're going to mix it up. Once it's all wet, you can take your respirator off. So just, again, safety reminder, because it always bears repeating. These pigments are made of mica powders, and those mica powders can get into your lungs and they will never leave. So it's much better to wear a respirator than to chance getting powders in your lungs and messing up your lungs, especially for somebody like me with asthma. I don't want to take any chances. My lungs suck enough as it is, so we wear the respirator. All right, so this is a beautiful, gorgeous color. And we are going to add a very scientific gloop of the Liquitex Super Heavy Gel. All right, so I've got my gloop. And we're going to mix it. So this is probably the most time-consuming part, and this is why I'm thinking twice about using so many pigments. The Gloss Super Heavy Gel is super chunky, and it takes a lot of mixing. So you just start squishing it, flopping stuff over, schmoozing it around, and keep on going until it's completely smooth and the consistency of a tube paint. And then I'm gonna scrape it all up and stick it into a container. And this takes several minutes to do. So I'm probably gonna speed this up for you so you don't have to sit through me scraping and smushing and scraping and smushing. But you have to keep on doing it until it's totally smooth. All right, we're getting close to the end. There's a couple of tiny little gloopies. You see what I mean? Like, you really got to mix it well, which is why I tend to only use a couple of piggies in with my tube paints, because the tube paints are so much easier to mix. Now, there might be an easier way to do this. I am not saying that there's not. This is just the way that I know works. And works for me. The first time I tried mixing up piggies and putting them into a cloud pour, I couldn't get a couple of the chunks out, and it really showed up in the final product, and I was super disappointed because all of those, like any little tiny speck of bubble is going to come up as a lump when you're finishing. So we'll just spread this out one last time. Let's see, it's looking pretty smooth. That's good. So this is a beautiful color. I don't know if you can see the sparkle from your angle. It looks a little lighter in the pouring medium, and that's one of the things that I kind of don't like about using Floetrol, is that often things look duller, and you know, even the final product, I think, comes out a little more matte and dull than it does when I'm doing the Shelly Art Blooms, where we're using untinted house paint that has a gloss varnish or a glossy finish to it. The Floetrol does not have a gloss finish, and I think it really kind of dampens some of the shine. Although those piggies do tend to come out and sparkle regardless. So, all right, so we are going to scoop this into a cup, and I'm going to weigh how much I have so I know about how much Floetrol to have. So let's get a cup on here. This one looks good. So we'll zero it out. Okay, and then see how much pigment we have, so we know how much Floetrol to add. So essentially what I'm going to do is scrape this as good as I can because I don't want to waste any of it, and scoop it all into that cup. So let's see I don't know why I'm putting this all in one cup, because I don't think I'm going to be able to mix it all in one cup. I think there's too much. There's definitely too much. I need a bigger cup. That's okay. Okay, so let's see how much this weighs. It is 24 grams. So I will add twice that amount in Floetrol, so about 48 grams. Actually, I can probably scrape up another gram here and make it an even 50. Whatever, close enough. Okay, so before I do another pigment, I would wipe this down with a baby wipe just to clean up all of the leftovers, wipe off my palette knives, and then I'm ready to go again. So I will, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to fit it, excuse me, fit all of the Floetrol into this cup, so I think I'm gonna have to split it into 2 cups and do 2 cups of Grenache. Oh, look, now it says 25. Go figure. All right, so we'll do an even 50 grams then. Maybe I'll scoop some more out into here and I can show you what that's like. All right, so that's 15, so this should be 10. Okay, it's not. That's unhelpful and weird. All right, well, it is what it is. We'll just add what it tells us to add. Okay, so we're just going to add our Floetrol to this. And let me get this out of the way so I can put you in the center here. All right, we'll add our Floetrol. So we've got 15 grams. So we'll add 30 grams of Floetrol. Oh, I should probably put that on there so I know how much I'm adding. So take it up to 45. Oops, that's too much. Oh well. My camera is a little too close. Okay, and then we mix. And this, like I said, it's, maybe I should start out with less Floetrol to begin so it's easier to mix in. Actually, that's worth a try for my second cup to see if it makes a difference, because it takes forever to mix this in so that it's smooth. And I think it would probably be easier to do if there was less Floetrol. So before we finish mixing that up, let's add a tiny bit of Floetrol to this cup and see how we do. Maybe that'll help us out. All right, so let's just add 10 to begin with. I'm going to take this off camera so I don't. Okay, we'll start out with that. So that was like 8, 9, something like that, grams of Floetrol. We'll see if it's easier to mix in. So you can see what I mean about how the color gets muted, like and the Floetrol does dry clear, so that kind of pastel look that it's getting isn't going to stick around. That was actually much easier to mix in a little bit at a time. So note to self, mix in a little bit of Floetrol and mix until it's smooth, and then add the rest of your Floetrol. And that will save me some trouble in the next couple of batches that I'm doing. All right, so once it's nice and smooth, we're gonna add the rest of our Floetrol. All right, that's looking pretty good. So we will add our Floetrol. So we've got 20 and we need it to go up to let's see, 36, I think. No, close enough. And then we'll check the consistency. All right, so let's mix and hope that now, yeah, that actually was much easier to get smooth. So note to self, when mixing piggies, add a little bit of Floetrol first and get it smooth, and then add the rest. And it's much easier to mix. You can see there's still like some bubbles. Yeah, those are air bubbles. They're not chunks, so that's good. But again, that's why you have to wait before you pour, because all of those little bubbles need time to come up to the surface and pop, so you don't wind up with bubbles in your final painting. And I mean, if you do wind up with a bunch of chunks and you're worried about it, one thing that I have done before is take in my mixture and run it through a mesh screen. I have a small one that I got at the dollar store. Hold on one second. It looks like this. It's tiny. It fits on the top of a cup, and I've poured it through. You can see there's like chunks of paint in the bottom of it. I have poured it through that mesh screen to get rid of the chunks. They can't fall through. It's a tiny mesh. So anything, you know, larger than that isn't going to fit. It does work. I do think it adds even more air bubbles to the mixture. So if you're going to do that, then you need to, you know, definitely wait even longer than you would otherwise. So let's check the consistency here. 1, 2, sink. 1, 2, sink. Looks pretty good. All right, so we're going to call that one good. That is Grenache. And again, it looks much more pastel in the Floetrol than the way it's going to dry. It's going to dry like this dark red, kind of coppery color, which is really, really beautiful in paintings. I love it. So fear not, my friends. So that's how I do my mixing. You know, with the cloud mix, it's 1 part the Vallejo Pearl Medium. And again, I'm not sure if this one's going to, it should work. Everybody else seems to have great results. But you can also use instead Deco Art satin enamels in pure white. That's what I've been using for my cloud pours, and I know that works. And I use that, you know, so 1 part of either the Vallejo Pearl Medium or the Deco Art satin enamels, and then 1 part of the Artist Loft soft body acrylic in white, and then 2 parts of Floetrol to that. For the tube paints, you know, any tube paint you're gonna do, you do 1 part of tube paint, 2 parts of the Floetrol, and then adjust to consistency. If it's too thin, add more tube paint to thicken it up. If it's too thick, add more Floetrol to thin it down. And the key here is you really want all of your consistencies to be the same. So every single one of the pigments you use, every single one of the tube paints you use, and your cloud mix all have to be the same consistency. If they're not, then you're going to get some that'll sink and some that'll float, and you know, it won't turn out how you want it to. So consistency is the key with fluid art. You know, the recipes are a good place to start, but you're always going to be adjusting for consistency. And then again, when I mix up my piggies, I take my glob of pigment, I add my Jo Sonja Gloss Varnish, mix those up until the pigment's dispersed, and then I add my Liquitex Gloss Super Heavy Gel, mix it up really good, and then add my Floetrol to that. So that's how I mix for cloud pours. I'll do another mixing video at some point for how I mix for my blooms, but this is what I was doing today, so I thought I'd share. Thanks for sticking around.